couple of days ago, I saw this post all over my Instagram feed celebrating the fact that France had banned Shein hauls. I then got tagged in it and sent it via Instagram DMs so many times that it was kind of inescapable. The post was shared only last week and has already got 500,000 likes and pages of comments. So seeing all this hype around it and seeing so many of you send it to me, I actually ended up sharing it to my stories because obviously this is a massive win, but I really shouldn't have done that without fact checking. And I guess that's the reason why I'm making this video today, because I don't think the post is entirely true. And I think it's really important we clarify. I completely get it. France bans Shein hauls is a great headline. It's attention grabbing. People are going to be talking about it. It's going to create buzz on social media. And that's kind of a hard thing to do when it comes to sustainable fashion news, which is often a little bit boring, especially when you start talking about legislation. And don't get me wrong, the post is kind of true, sort of, maybe, but not entirely. And I think it's really important that we clarify, because not only could someone see this, take it at face value and get really upset about France seemingly dictating what influencers can post online and, you know, spark massive debates on social media, I also think it creates unrealistic expectations of what legislation can do. So we're gonna really quickly break down why this is and isn't true, starting with that headline, France bans Shein hauls. Just to say, there is no specific language mentioning Shein hauls, let alone banning them in the legislation. There is a part that proposes a ban on social media advertising for Shein and Temu and other ultra-fast fashion brands. And that targets both traditional advertising and influencer advertising. So again, whilst there's no specific mention of the Shein hauls we see dominating our TikTok feeds, there is the possibility that influencers promoting these brands on social media could face penalties. I am a little bit confused why Shein hauls have been banned is the headline people pulled from the articles I assume we're all reading about the legislation. Unless I've missed something in this specific legislation, but given the fact it's in French, I wouldn't know. But from what I can make out, the wording around the entire advertising ban proposal is kind of vague. They haven't really gone into exactly what it means yet. And I'm also quite confused how they would go about enforcing some of these influencer penalties, let alone a ban on Shein hauls in particular, since you can't exactly stop someone ordering a ton of clothes from a retailer online and then filming themselves trying it on, unboxing it in their bedrooms. But maybe what they can enforce is brands not being allowed to sponsor creators, and maybe brands not being able to give French creators discount codes to promote to their audience. Although with Shein, you don't need to be an influencer to get a discount code. So again, not sure how that will work. And maybe you could put a stop to the paid haul content that brands like Shein send creators free clothes for that's completely designed to go viral. These are not trivial things, by the way. Given how heavily brands like Shein and Temu rely on their social media advertising for their business model, this would be a big deal, even without a blanket ban on Shein hauls. And it's super interesting that France has decided to target not only what we're being sold and who buy, but how we're being sold it on social media. Everyone who watches my channel has heard me go on and on about how social media in particular is so insidious for promoting wasteful, unnecessary shopping as entertainment. So I feel like it doesn't need to be said how much of a win it is that we're tackling this behavior from companies who are majorly responsible for a lot of waste in fashion. But does this legislation and the jurisdiction France has over Shein promoting social media advertising completely remove the incentive for influencers to keep creating this content on their own, who can make money outside of paid sponsorships by sharing affiliate links with their viewers and like-for-like codes, not to mention how much they get paid for the engagement when these videos go viral. With all of that incentive, I don't think the idea of banning paid sponsorships will completely eradicate this content. I don't think it will completely stop French influencers posting overconsumptive content that promotes these fast fashion brands. And, of course, the elephant in the room, it doesn't yet stop influencers from posting and being paid for haul content that features other brands outside of Shein and Temu and the ultra fast fashions. In fact, this legislation in its current form doesn't really penalize other brands altogether. It's missing out on an entire chunk of the industry, and there's a reason for that I'm going to come back to. Don't get me wrong, this legislation in its current form is still a win. Shein and Temu are some of the most wasteful companies in the fashion industry, but this isn't everything we could have hoped for. That's probably the biggest part of this viral post I wanted to clear up. The other thing is that it makes it seem like this ban is happening now or coming into effect in the next couple of weeks, but there are still some hurdles and paperwork that France needs to go through, like sending some of it to the EU for final approval, including the bit about banning advertising. So again, we can't really celebrate yet. And about this viral post in particular, I completely get it. I get why you need an attention-grabbing headline like France bans Shein hauls, because it's so hard to talk about unsexy things like legislation and turn that into something cool and interesting, especially on social media. And it's very hard to capture people's attention in the same way they have with this meme format if they had loads of caveats and little paragraphs explaining all the nuances of such a detailed new law. Honestly, I think the post did a really good job of breaking down the legislation into an accessible, fun format and explaining to people not only what this new legislation kind of is, but why it's needed. And there was a lot of comments I saw of people saying this was a really fun way to learn news and like this is the only way they want to learn news in the future. So I definitely don't think it's a huge evil. I just do think there was a little bit of misinformation here. And I think a big part of that is on the vague wording of the bill and the fact that they've gone through so many revisions that I don't think they really know what's in it anymore. And again, if you want the drama behind this bill, which is pretty big, then keep watching. I'm gonna go into it. But first, I want to briefly move on to the parts of the bill this viral post didn't explain that I think are really, really interesting and what they mean for fashion. For example, how this bill has forced French lawmakers to differentiate between ultra fast fashion and ultra express fashion. This weird distinction is designed to protect some fast fashion companies that France doesn't want to piss off, like H&M, Primark, and Zara. One of the specific defining points of this difference is that the protected companies might have a retail presence in France and that might contribute to the economy and raise jobs and stuff. But again, I've found the distinction very hard to figure out. For example, you may assume that Shein and Temu were filed under the ultra fast fashion bracket of this distinction, since ultra fast fashion is a term we use a lot for these companies. But a quote I read from a French lawmaker who was working on this bill seems to imply that it's the other way around, and he calls Shein and Temu ultra express fashion in this quote. And yet the very article that the quote is in calls Shein and Temu ultra fast fashion in the headline. It's kind of hilarious that this is already causing confusion. I mean, it's stupid, but it's funny. And it kind of goes into the point I always make on this channel about how when you create bogus buzzwords and, make sustainable fashion harder and harder, it always creates problems and ambiguity. But anyway, the other interesting thing this bill wants to do is tax small parcels being shipped in from outside the EU at 2 to 4 euros per package. And there's even threats to raise that to 10 euros by 2030. Given that Shein and Temu's business model is intentionally built around shipping lots and lots of small packages to get through the de minimis loophole, this could completely impact not only their profits, but their business model in the future if they choose to change it. Given all that, we need to unpick whether this legislation is going to have an impact. The answer is kind of, well, obviously. Slapping a parcel tax on two of the biggest fashion giants in the industry is going to have massive waves not only for consumers but for their business models and profits. Just to give you an idea, Shein and Temu together shipped 800 million packages to France in 2024, more than half of all parcels sent to the country. Obviously, putting a 2 to 4 euro fine on each parcel is going to either eat into Shein's profits or raise prices for consumers, and either one of those could be a big threat to the popularity of Shein. Not to mention, taking on the advertising side of the business at the same time as sales are potentially going down or profits are going down is really just gonna make things implode. And I really do think this bill in its current form could devastatingly hurt Shein and Temu's French operations, which outside of the US is one of Shein's biggest markets. And given that their US market is also in a tizzy right now with tariffs, it's kind of the perfect storm for the company, and I really do think they're in a weak position right now. Going on to the bill itself and whether it will have an impact on the wider fashion industry, I think it's kind of setting a precedent that could slowly filter out to other brands. As the viral Instagram post that sparked this entire video kind of puts it in the comments, the bill is not perfect. It's far from perfect, but it's a start. It's a good direction we're heading in, and it should work to curb overconsumption and overproduction of these companies. It just took so much more to get here than it should have. And yes, this means we're covering the drama of the bill now. Okay, if you weren't already aware of France's fast fashion bill, it's had a very messy time from the moment it was proposed to it getting almost approved now. We had to sit through many disappointing reiterations and changes to the bill that many people once thought would be a landmark strike against the fashion industry as a whole. It went from being highly praised in the fashion industry to many critics coming out as reiterations filtered through, to then many people thinking it was just dead in the water as we hadn't heard from the bill or any progress on it in like 6 months, despite the fact that right when it was introduced, it had almost unanimous approval. But obviously it's not dead, and several revisions later, and with many caveats and clarifications differentiating the worst offenders of fashion from, slightly less bad ones that help the French economy, we're finally at the end game, with Shein and Temu kind of cooked, but definitely less severe restrictions on European fashion companies. You might be asking how Zara and H&M and all of those have gotten off so scot-free for a bill that was initially designed to target almost all of the worst offenders in fashion. Vestiaire Collective, a French resale platform, did a viral Instagram, TikTok video calling out the fact that this bill had been stalled and why has it been stalled, and speculating that the major reason was because companies had killed it. Companies have lobbied intensely during the period this bill was going through government, convincing and bribing lawmakers to narrow down the language that allows them to loophole their way out of being taxed. One of their big arguments, like we've mentioned, is that they contribute to the French economy by having retail presence and hiring jobs in the area. And I guess enough elbows got greased that France decided to take on the big hitters first. Shein isn't happy, obviously, especially because they also hired their own lobbyists, including ex-French ministers, to try have their own say on the bill. But obviously, this didn't work too well. In response to the news this legislation passed, Shein said that they are not a fast fashion company. Their statement made clear they don't believe they should fall under this penalty, and they think it's unfair they've been targeted with a ultra fast fashion label that they don't identify with, adding that their business model is part of the solution, not the problem. If you're unfamiliar, the company often talks about their made to order business model and how it's waste free, and apparently how that makes them a sustainable company. Okay, now we've broken all of that down and talked about the legislation, shall we do a really quick Shein update and what else they've been up to? Because the news is very relevant. For example, on top of this new French legislation, they were also recently fined 40 million euros by French officials for deceptive commercial practices. Basically, on their website, they were showing fake discounts and giving unsubstantiated environmental claims. Shein quietly accepted the fine. There was no sort of retaliation, as we saw with the legislation. I think they just wanted to let it go away. But it now looks like they're going to be hit with another one over their use of cookies and tracking on their website. And this one's for 150 million euros. Also, it's now looking like they've abandoned their plans to do a London IPO after the entire drama we've had to go through for the past year or whatever as they try to list on our stock exchange. And instead, they've confidentially filed in Hong Kong. Despite the fact that we know they've filed elsewhere, they're still pressuring the UK government to allow them to list here, which is kind of weird. But honestly, after they've been rejected by the US, the UK, and now slapped with all of this by France, you can kind of almost feel sorry for them. Almost. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to say in this video. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts, and you better follow me on Instagram, bestie. Okay, love you, bye.